The hallway smelled like antiseptic and something warmer. Maybe the baked ziti from the volunteer cart, or just the faint trace of skin and fear that lingered in oncology wings. Grace walked past the nurse's station, her eyes fixed on the floor. The scarf on her head, blue with little painted flowers, was knotted tightly at the base of her neck. Her steps were slow, uneven, like she wasn't fully sure if she was walking toward treatment or away from something else entirely. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft hiss. She swallowed. Memorial Sloan Kettering, 7th floor. Chemotherapy suite. She had been here before, of course. This was round 3. But somehow it felt harder today. Her skin felt thinner. Like the chemicals had stripped away more than just her cells. They were peeling her, layer by layer, down to something she didn't recognize. The waiting area was half full. A teenage boy sat next to his mother, playing a video game with the sound turned off. An older man coughed into a napkin. Across the room, a woman with no eyebrows sipped broth from a paper cup, staring into space. Grace took a seat near the corner, pulling her sweater tighter around her, even though the heat was on. The plastic chair pressed cold into her spine. She couldn't shake the nausea, or the smell, her own skin, sharp and bitter, like rust and bleach. She remembered reading once that chemo patients could develop a distinct scent. Now she believed it. It wasn't perfume or sweat. It was something chemical, and it clung to her like guilt. A nurse called her name, softly, kindly. Grace stood, nodded, followed. The infusion room was lined with recliners, each separated by a curtain on a ceiling rail. She chose the last one in the corner. She liked the quiet there. Less chance of having to talk. Less chance someone might look at her too long. She eased into the chair. The nurse, a woman named Shauna, young, with a braid and tired but bright eyes, hooked up her IV with practiced gentleness. "You doing okay, hun?" she asked. Grace nodded. She didn't trust her voice. Shauna smiled and adjusted the saline drip. "Buzz if you need anything." And then she was gone. The room hummed with the low rhythm of machines and the faint tap of keyboards. Grace looked at her hands. The veins stood out more now. Her skin looked older. Not just tired, older. She breathed slowly, trying not to cry. Not because of the pain, but because of the weight. The kind that settles on your chest and says, "This is your life now." After 10 minutes, the heat in her body rose, then the sweat, damp at her hairline. Her stomach turned. She reached into her tote bag for her peppermint oil, but the scent did nothing this time. She stood slowly, Ivy trailing beside her like a reluctant child. She walked to the nearby patient restroom and closed the door behind her. Inside, the overhead light buzzed. She stared at the mirror but didn't lift her eyes. Not yet. She sat down on the closed toilet lid, knees tucked to her chest. The scarf on her head felt like it was choking her. She pulled it off, exposing her scalp, soft, bare, pale with patches of stubborn hair still clinging like weeds. She hated the sight of it, hated how unfamiliar she looked, and underneath her shirt, the empty space where her left breast used to be throbbed, not from pain, but from memory. She still hadn't looked at herself, not fully, not since the surgery. Eli had told her she was beautiful, but she hadn't believed it. He had touched her shoulder gently one night and whispered, "I'm still right here." But she'd turned away, pretending to be asleep. She was no longer the Grace who stood in front of students teaching color theory and symmetry. She was no longer the Grace who wore fitted dresses, her dark hair in loose waves, and smiled when Eli touched the small of her back. Now she was a woman hiding in a hospital bathroom, unable to face herself. Her breath caught. She gagged. Not from nausea this time, but from shame. And then she cried, not loudly, but quietly, like water slipping through a crack in the floorboards. Her arms wrapped around her body. The scent of her own sweat was unbearable. She reached into her bag for the pack of wet wipes, her hands shaking. She didn't hear the door open, but a knock came, gentle. "Grace?" a voice asked. Low. Familiar. Eli. Her heart stumbled. "Grace, are you okay?" he asked. She couldn't answer. "I'm coming in, okay?" She tried to say no, but it was too late. The door clicked open slowly. He must have gotten the key from the nurse. He stepped in and closed it behind him. The light caught the worry in his face. He looked tired, his work shirt slightly wrinkled, a stain of coffee on the collar. But his eyes were steady, soft, not afraid. She turned away, pulling her scarf up quickly, but her hands fumbled. He didn't say anything for a moment. And then he stepped closer. He knelt in front of her, like she was a child and he was tying her shoe. But he didn't reach out, didn't touch. He just asked softly, "Can I help?" That was it. 3 words, simple, whole. Her chest cracked open, tears spilled fast, not pretty ones. She sobbed, shoulders trembling, palms pressed to her face. She couldn't speak. He didn't flinch, didn't shush her or tell her to calm down. He waited. When she finally lowered her hands, he was still kneeling. She didn't know why, but she nodded. He stood, opened the small pack of wipes from her bag. He ran one under warm water from the sink. Then he came back, and with the gentleness only he could manage, he began wiping her neck, then her forehead behind her ears. The cloth was warm and soothing, just like he used to do for their daughter when she had fevers. She was crying again, but quieter now. "Grace," he said, barely above a whisper. "You don't have to do this alone." "I smell like poison," she whispered. He shook his head. "You smell like someone fighting for her life." Her lips trembled. And then she did the thing she'd been afraid to do. She pulled back her oversized sweater, unbuttoned the front of her blouse slowly until the edge of her surgical scar peeked out from the sports bra she wore for comfort. Then, without fully removing it, she pulled the fabric aside, just enough. This was the first time she'd shown him. His eyes didn't widen. He didn't flinch. He didn't try to fix anything. He just looked, and not with pity, but with a kind of reverence. "You're still you," he said quietly. Her bottom lip quivered. "But I don't feel like me." He nodded. "I know." She looked down ashamed. "I didn't want you to see me like this." But he said, "I wanted to be with you in every part of this, not just the good parts." His voice was steady, not dramatic, just honest. And in that quiet bathroom, under fluorescent lights and tile walls, something shifted. Something loosened in her chest. For the first time in months, she felt seen, but not as a patient, as herself. He pulled a clean t-shirt from the tote bag he had brought, helped her slip out of the sweat-soaked one. He handed her lip balm, her peppermint roller, her favorite hand cream that smelled like lavender and citrus. They didn't talk much after that. He helped her up, and when they left the restroom, she didn't hide her face. Not because she felt beautiful, but because she felt held. The night in Queens was quieter than Grace remembered. Their small apartment sat on the 3rd floor, over 40 minutes' drive from the hospital. Outside the bedroom window was a narrow balcony where Eli would stand every morning, coffee in hand, watching airplanes glide across the sky as if sketching invisible paths into the stillness. After her latest round of chemotherapy, they came home just before dusk. She was drained. Her skin had the pallor of blank paper. Her hair, well, there was no point mentioning it anymore. Each time a few strands fell on the pillow, she startled, as if it were her very self unraveling. But Eli never mentioned the pillow. He just quietly washed it every week. Grace hadn't spoken since they left the hospital. She turned off the lights as soon as they entered the bedroom, avoiding the brightness the way one avoids another's gaze. She wore an oversized t-shirt, collar pulled high, sleeves long enough to hide her elbows. The turban remained wrapped around her head, even though the breeze in the room was gentle enough to let it go. Eli placed the medicine bag on the nightstand and brought her a glass of water. "I'll leave it here," he said. She didn't respond. Not because she was angry, just tired. Tired of holding herself together, even for the smallest niceties. Tired of pretending everything was okay, pretending she was still his love. Eli sat on the edge of the bed so lightly the mattress didn't shift. He didn't touch her, just sat in silence. After a few minutes, he got up and stepped out onto the balcony. The night air brushed against him like a long, slow breath. He pulled a cigarette from his pocket, something he'd quit long ago, back when their daughter got sick with asthma some years ago. He turned it between his fingers, as if weighing an entire life. Grace, though facing away from him, New. She didn't stop him. The lighter clicked in the quiet night. Smoke curled into the air, thin and faint like emotions left behind. He stood there for a long time. When only the filter remained, he stubbed it out in an old terracotta pot that once held mint, now long dead. Then he came back inside. Grace pretended to be asleep, but sleep didn't come. She heard the sound of the shower, the towel brushing his skin, the medicine cabinet creaking open. Then the bed dipped again. He lay beside her without touching, but not distant. She lay in the dark, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. She wanted to turn toward him, say something, thank you, I'm sorry, anything. But something within her, that shadow of shame, that invisible emptiness, kept holding her back. The next morning, Eli was up early, as always. He made breakfast, eggs, toast, coffee, not because Grace could eat. He just wanted to keep some rhythm to their days, to hold on to the part of life cancer hadn't yet stolen. Grace sat in the kitchen, elbows resting on the table. No brushed hair, no lipstick, just a shadow of a person, silent in the space that used to be theirs. After a while, the doorbell rang. Eli went to answer it. It was Travis, his longtime colleague from the airport. A dark-skinned man with short hair and a smile as bright as an April morning. Travis said, "Yo, brought some pastries for you too. My wife made them. Heard Grace was home these days. Figured I'd drop by." "Come on in," Eli replied, a bit hesitant. Grace didn't have time to slip back into the bedroom, so she sat still. Travis entered and paused for a split second when he saw her, but only for a moment. He quickly smiled and waved as if nothing were off. "Hey there, Grace. I heard you like cinnamon pear pastries. My wife just baked a fresh batch." Grace offered a faint smile and nodded. "Thank you." She was never great at hosting, especially now. Travis set the box on the table and chatted casually for a bit about machinery, a newly delivered aircraft, then glanced at Eli and smirked. "Oh, and the boss was asking the other day why you still haven't taken that promotion, the one in Denver. Better pay, leading a new team. Real solid opportunity." Grace flinched. She turned to Eli. He was pouring coffee, and his hand paused for a second. But he said nothing. Travis went on. "Yeah. He turned it down. Said he wanted to stay close to home. I figured it was because of you, Grace." The air went still. Travis scratched his head. I guess I've said too much. I'll get going. Take care, okay?" When the door closed, Grace remained frozen. She looked at Eli. "You turned down that opportunity?" Eli sat down. He nodded, offering no explanation. "Because of me?" she asked softly. He let out a breath, nodded gently. "Yeah." A wave rose in her chest, not sorrow, but surprise. Moved. Since when had she forgotten who he was? Quiet, never asking for praise, but always choosing to stay. Grace looked down at her hands, thin, pale. She closed them into a fist. "I didn't know. I thought—" "You don't need to know," Eli interrupted, his voice soft as breath. "I just need to be with you." She didn't notice when the tears came, only that something inside her softened. Lighter. That night, for the first time in weeks, she didn't turn off the nightlight. The hospital shuttle bus rolled past the small park on 67th Street, carrying Grace back to Memorial Sloan Kettering for her 4th round of chemotherapy. Inside, it was quiet, with only the soft sound of tires brushing the damp road and the occasional muffled cough from another passenger. She leaned her head against the window, a silver-gray scarf wrapped around her head, hands clasped loosely in her lap. Autumn had arrived, and through the glass the trees had turned like the paintings she used to hang on her classroom walls, burnt orange, golden yellow, deep wine red. But she no longer painted. For over a month now, the brushes had stayed tucked away in their box. Eli sat beside her, holding a bag with snacks and anti-nausea meds. Neither of them spoke. She didn't need to. He didn't either. Between them was a kind of silence that no longer hurt. She thought about the day Travis came over, about the promotion Eli had turned down, about the look in his eyes that never asked for praise, only for closeness. The hospital was the same as always, the scent of disinfectant, the soft footfalls of nurses, the fluorescent lights that made everything look paler than it really was. But today, as Grace stepped into the waiting room, something felt different. A young girl was sitting alone, crying. Very young, not yet 20, her scalp barely covered in short stubble like fresh grass after a storm. She wore an oversized shirt, arms wrapped tightly around herself as if shrinking from the world. Grace hadn't meant to stare, but their eyes met for just a second, enough to glimpse a pain too raw to hide. Eli gently placed a hand on Grace's back, a quiet reminder. "Sit down. I'll go get the snacks." She nodded. Just as she sat down, Dr. Rivera appeared. No white coat today. She wore a plum-colored sweater, her hair neatly pinned up, soft shoes tapping lightly on the tile. She might have just been passing by, but she paused. "Grace?" she said with a soft smile. "You look better today." Grace gave a faint, reluctant smile. "I doubt that, Doctor." Dr. Rivera glanced toward the young girl, then back at Grace. "You know, someone once told me cancer doesn't just take your hair, your breasts, or your health. It takes your eyes, too, that inner light we forget we ever had." Grace said nothing. Rivera continued, "But I think you're getting that light back, little by little." Grace looked at her, unsure how to respond, but her eyes stung. Dr. Rivera said gently, "That girl, her boyfriend left right after she was diagnosed. She's only 18. Just finished her freshman year. No one brings her to chemo anymore. She comes alone, quietly, every time." Grace's heart sank. That girl, she was as young as her own daughter would have been, and in her eyes was something Grace had once seen in her own reflection, the act of giving up on oneself. Dr. Rivera leaned down slightly, gently patting Grace on the shoulder. "I've seen hundreds of loved ones walk away from patients because the wait was too much. But I've also seen people like Eli, the ones who stay, every single day quietly, without conditions." Grace looked toward the corner of the room. Eli was fumbling with a small container of yogurt, his fingers a little clumsy as he tried to peel back the lid without spilling it. When he finished, he reached into the bag and pulled out a small spoon, an old stainless steel one with rounded edges, the kind she liked because it wasn't sharp. He held up the yogurt, his eyes meeting hers. A silent question. "Do you want some?" Grace nodded, and strangely, she felt tears falling, without a sound. No sobbing, no shaking breath, just a quiet stream that ran deep, straight to the center of her chest. Dr. Rivera said softly, "Some people don't need to say 'I love you' to show love. They just peel back the lid of the yogurt, keep the spoon clean, and sit beside you." Grace didn't answer, but she understood. That night, when they got home, she didn't go straight to the bedroom. Instead, she stepped out onto the balcony. On the railing sat the old mint pot, dried and lifeless. But from a crack in the soil, a tiny green sprout had pushed its way up, so small it felt like a whisper of life. Eli was in the kitchen washing dishes. "Eli," she called. He turned around. She said, "Tomorrow, could you bring up my colored pencils?" His eyes lit up, not dramatically, but just enough for her to notice. He said, "Sure. Want me to bring the sketch pad too?" Grace nodded. "And, if it's okay, could you sit with me while I draw?" Eli dried his hands on a kitchen towel. "I'll sit the whole time if you want." She smiled for the first time in days, a real smile. Her last day of chemo didn't look the way she once imagined. There were no fireworks, no applause in the hallway, no little party with balloons and cupcakes like in those videos online. Just a printed sheet of paper that read, "You did it!" in smudged purple ink, and a gentle hug from Nurse Shauna, who always seemed to know when silence said the most. "You're done," Shauna smiled, giving Grace's arm a light squeeze. "Your hair will grow back. Your taste buds too, and your heart. I don't think it ever left." Grace smiled, not quite sure she had the strength to fully grasp those words, but she nodded. Eli was waiting in the hallway. No flowers, no sweet treats. Just him. And for Grace, that was enough. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen curtains, soft and golden like a wash of thinned oil paint. The apartment was quiet, with only the gentle hiss of the kettle coming to a boil. Grace stood in front of the mirror, the turban resting still in her hands. Her head was no longer smooth, tiny fine hairs had begun to grow in. Not enough to style, not enough to be called hair in the truest sense, but they were a beginning. She looked at herself. For the first time in months, she didn't avoid the mirror. The shirt she wore fit her just right. Not too tight, not too loose. Beneath her sports bra, the scar was still there. One side of her chest remained empty, but it no longer felt ugly. It was simply a part of her, a part that had survived. Grace tilted her body slightly, placing a hand over her left side. No pain now, just a quiet warmth, like someone placing their palm on her from behind. She walked into the kitchen. For the first time in many months, she opened the window and let the autumn breeze sweep in, carrying away the lingering scent of medicine. Eli was still asleep. He'd stayed up all night when her stomach ached after the last dose. Now he was curled up, arm draped over the pillow like a boy too tired to move. Grace took the kettle and brewed coffee. She remembered how he liked it, black, no sugar, but with a drop of vanilla. It had been so long since she'd made him a cup, so long since she'd done anything for anyone other than try to survive. She poured the coffee into a mug, added a slice of toast with peanut butter, his favorite since college, and placed it on the table. Then she sat down, hands wrapped around her own cup, and waited. Before long, Eli shuffled into the kitchen, hair tousled, eyes slightly swollen from lack of sleep. When he saw the table, he paused. "You woke up early?" he asked, his voice still hoarse. Grace nodded, smiling softly. "It's the first time since treatment started that I feel like I can breathe." He came closer and sat across from her, studying her face. "You took off the scarf?" he asked gently, like afraid to break the moment. She replied, "Yeah, my hair's growing back, but that's not why I took it off." He tilted his head, waiting for her to go on. Grace drew in a breath. "I took it off because I want to face myself, the way you always have." Eli didn't say a word. He simply reached out and gently touched her hand. "Do you know what I've been most afraid of?" she asked. "What?" "Not dying, but the thought that, if I'm no longer the same, maybe our love won't be either." Eli shook his head softly. "Grace, I love you not because you're beautiful. I love you because you're you, and you've never gone anywhere." Silence settled over the kitchen, but this time it was the gentle kind. Grace looked at him. "I think I'm ready to live again." He smiled. Not broadly, but deeply, like hearing an old song he once loved and thought he'd forgotten. Then he stood, stepped behind her, and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting lightly on her shoulder. He said, "I've been waiting for you to come back, and I'll keep waiting, every day, no matter how long it takes." She leaned her head against his chest, where his heartbeat remained steady, unchanged. But now she could hear it with her whole soul. A week later, Grace sat in front of the easel. Her first painting after months of unfinished canvases. Eli sat nearby, holding a cup of tea, reading some technical manual she couldn't make sense of. But he was there, just like he promised. Grace dipped her brush into olive green and traced the first outline of a tree. It wasn't perfect. Her hand still trembled. But it was alive. On the canvas there was no face, no breasts, no flowing hair, just one hand resting on another. A simple image, but it held their entire journey, the loss, the waiting, and the presence.